Courage speaks. Courage speaks. Courage speaks.
Welcome to episode 28 of Courage Speaks. I'm your host, Sam Sherman. Courage Speaks is brought to you by Courage to Connect, an outpatient mental health center offering therapy, psychological testing, psychiatry, and dietitian services for all ages located on Chicago's North Shore. Today's episode is a little bit different. It's a personal one, a meaningful one for me. I'm joined by someone who's about to become a part of the Courage to Connect team, but who's already been a huge part of my life for a long time. Our guest today, Brian Ray, is not only a future clinical intern here at our practice, he's also one of my best friends and someone who has walked with me through many chapters of my life. In this conversation, we dive into Brian's journey into the field of mental health, from personal experiences with mental health challenges in his teenage years to his early fascination with psychology. But more than that, this episode is about friendship. It's about vulnerability, trust, and what it means to truly be seen and accepted by another person. We talk about what it's like to have someone in your life who can challenge you, support you, and grow with you, and how those same dynamics show up in therapy and in life. This is an episode about connection, about the kind of relationships that help us become who we are. So please enjoy, for episode 28 of Courage Speaks, our guest, Brian Ray. Hello and welcome to Courage Speaks. I am your host, Sam Sherman. I'm joined here today with a very special guest, Brian Ray. How you doing, Brian?
Don't laugh. I'm doing okay. How are you?
I'm good. So the listeners are listening and they heard my setup just now and I said very special guest and I said Brian Ray. And if you're wondering, I don't know who that is, we're going to tell you who that is. Brian, as far as, professionally on this podcast here, he's coming on because he is going to be joining our team here at Courage to Connect as a clinical intern, I think in like the next couple of weeks, if I'm not mistaken. Next week, you're officially on board, but
yeah, I should start seeing clients end of April.
Okay, end of April. Excellent. So that's why that's one reason why Brian's here today. But I'm going to put that to the side for a second. We're going to probably weave in and out of these things, but I will just say for the listeners, in the interest of full disclosure, Brian is one of, if not my closest friend and my brother, not literally my brother, but, close. You know what I'm saying?
I know what you're saying, but the people...
The listeners probably don't know what I'm saying. I keep looking at Brian as if we're on video almost, and we're not. So I need to remember that.
I need some validation.
No, Brian, how long have we known each other for?
It's been over a decade.
Yeah, it's been over a decade, which is kind of incredible to think about. Just for a little bit of context, we were friends that we met actually after, I guess technically after we kind of became friends.
Towards the end / right after college.
Yes, toward the end, after college, which is particularly unique because as we've talked about many times, I've told you a lot, I was a person who always felt like from a young age, I had like a few close friends and I thought I don't need any more friends in my life, which has become a funnier and funnier thing as time has gone on. But you were really one of the first people that I had become extremely close with that was sort of in another phase of my life, which was sort of toward the end of college and after college. And you become like my closest friend. And it was a lesson for me of basically being like, Sam, you dummy, like actually there's some really cool people out there.
Maybe there's more room in your circle.
Yes, which is, again, talking to you about this, it's kind of funny because Brian and I are extremely close and we'll talk about this. But like I said before, we're going to weave in and out of the personal side of this, the professional side of this. I wanted our listeners to know that kind of going in, but I think a lot of it's sort of tied together. And I'd like you to kind of share a little bit around, because before, I've told my story on this podcast before. I'm repeating this for the listeners a lot of the time that I'm going to do it again, but broadcast journalism major in undergrad, worked in various sales jobs for several years before going back to school to become a mental health counselor, what I do today. But prior to me going back to school, you had, for even like years before when I first knew you, I knew that psychology, therapy, something in this space was something that you were interested in.
Yeah.
So can you share a little bit, even before you kind of formally made the leap into this field, where that interest came from, if you were able to track it?
Yeah. We could go farther back than this, but the first thing to jump to mind is throughout high school, I struggled with my own mental health issues. I also had some close friends that I was able to lean on as natural support. So like that was very helpful. But when I shared some of my symptoms with my mom or my grandparents, they didn't really seem to fully get it. And so I spent a lot of time in my own head wishing that someone got it. And so from that point, I really wanted to kind of be the person I wish I had. And so I've felt a strong connection with like working with teens. As far as careers, like in and out of the field, like I've worked in after school programs with like middle school and junior high students. And that was very rewarding. It always felt fun to like gain the trust of these students and like feel like they really could turn to me with like what's going on in their life and not feel too small or big to kind of get over. But then moving forward to college, I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. My family, there's a lot of teachers. So I was like, I guess that's an easy path.
Mhm.
Like maybe high school, there's a little bit more money there. I like history. Let's do that.
Mhm.
Didn't really go, my first college experience didn't go as planned, but explored some other careers intermittently. But I took some psychology classes. I don't think I'm unique in this, but like I took abnormal psychology and was
Mhm.
just fascinated by the different disorders, the way that symptoms manifest, the differences across cultures. And so when I was out of school, I just did a lot of independent reading on these topics, how like different Western theorists conceptualize people versus Eastern cultures. And it was just a really fun rabbit hole to kind of dive into out of just my own self-interest.
And I think you and I are pretty similar in the sense, in the way that you're describing, like even a class like abnormal psych, where there's probably there's a lot of classes that you and I throughout like really all levels of education, particularly high school, undergrad, those things, a lot of classes that we really couldn't engage with, didn't care so much about.
Yeah.
But that feeling of like abnormal psych was a class where it sounds like the feeling of actually being in a school setting and being like, oh, actually, this subject is interesting. Maybe it's not that I don't like school, but maybe it's that
I'm picking the wrong classes.
Right. Was that kind of what that feeling was? Yeah.
It's like, oh, if I pick something in line with something I'm interested in, it's not going to feel so hard to get through. I'm not trudging through it. They're not forcing me to read these books. I would choose to read these anyway.
Mm-hmm.
And there's some guidance there.
So what was there a sort of you've had an interest in psychology and in this field and throughout your life, and with your own personal experiences, as it comes to like professionally, was there a moment that there may not have been like a specific moment, but was there a time where you thought I'd work in this field, or maybe that's something I could look into or would be a possibility?
There's no particular moment. When I returned to finish my undergrad, it was about a year and a half before COVID. And I knew I just wanted to finish a degree in psychology. I knew at the very least, I was interested in that. I
Mm-hmm.
had already come to the conclusion that I'd like to be a therapist. I didn't at that point know all the different kind of pathways to get there, but all the different like alphabet soup at the end of the name meant, where it's like, what are the mechanical or semantic differences between an LCSW, an LCPC, an LPC? What do those paths look like? I just knew I'm going to pick one of them at some point and I'm going to get there.
You're like, you kind of knew generally what the job is. You're like, I want to do that.
Yeah.
How do I do that? That's how I don't know. That's how I always felt about it. It's like,
Yeah.
I want to talk to people, and, I want to be a therapist in those ways. And then it's like, oh, right, there's all the, how do I do that? Right.
Yeah. And then there were moments where it definitely felt like I would feel kind of stuck, where there's almost so many different paths that can end up in similar areas or even like slightly like adjacent, or like then there's doctoral programs, ID programs, research backed testing, but you can still see client. And so as I was doing my research, it felt more and more overwhelming of like, well, what am I supposed to pick to get there? Around that time as well, during undergrad, I was starting to get into some research, like psychological research, things ranging from like effects of mindfulness techniques through like online games versus yoga, to things like tag language in professional emails and how like gender differences are perceived and things like that. And I had never liked math. growing up. And for some reason, the statistics of it like just kind of clicked in my head. Like it just made sense. And so
like the way math in this context clicked.
The numbers, I don't know what it was exactly, but like it's like in a movie where 50 different people are looking at this like cipher and it's like, this is nonsense. And then you give it to one person and they're like, it just says this. Like,
it made sense.
It's intuitive. And it explained, there was also like an artistic component to like designing research that I really liked, that I actually think is paralleled in like interventions in IT and group and couples counseling. And so when I thought of scientific research, I thought it was going to be like very serious, very strict. And to see this kind of artistic side of it was like very exciting for me. So I explored some of that while still kind of keeping this idea of being a counselor. And ultimately, my passion and like goal was to become a therapist. And so that was the next step. And it's like research will always be there, a PsyD, whatever, a psychology, whatever other options exist, they'll still exist. But I was able to narrow it down to like, I want counseling, not social work for whatever reason. I looked at programs and just kind of jumped in head first. It's like, let's see where this goes.
So you had this sort of pretty strong suspicion that these were things that were, a lot of the things were intuitive, particularly on the research side also, but also knowing, kind of having a sense for, like a lot of us in this field, right? At some point you have this idea of like, maybe this is something that I can do. Or, some people might say maybe it's something I could be good at. And as you know me, it's hard for me to acknowledge those things. So it's something we can do, right? But when you started, where did you go to I know this, but for our listeners, where did you go to graduate school? Where did you end up landing?
I initially applied to Adler and went through orientation initially with the idea of going into like a sports psychology.
The specific program. Yeah.
And I'm still interested in that topic, but I mean, I'll just bluntly say like cost played a major factor. Like it was very, very, very expensive. Not to say it's not worth it, but like I wasn't that sure, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And so I looked at Northeastern, National Louis, and some other universities kind of around the Chicagoland area and landed on National Louis.
And when you started taking your classes there in the graduate program, was it immediate? Did you immediately feel like, oh, this was the right decision? Did it take some time? Do you feel like it was the right decision? I assume yes, but what was your process like there in adjusting and kind of taking that on?
I'm very happy with the decision. I think it was definitely the right decision for then and continues to be. Our first professor, I'll speak to my cohort a little bit, very mixed reviews as far as his approach. I happened to really like his like sense of humor about things, but he also tried to just like scare everyone right away of like,
how so? Yeah, like what did that look like?
Where it wasn't this extreme, but it was kind of the vibe of not all of you are going to make it through this program, like, as if it's like a boot camp,
right? Yeah.
And it was
look at the person to your right. Look at the person to your left.
All three of you will not.
All three of you will not make it.
And so, but the first class we took was theories, and then the second class later, the professor for that, she was the exact opposite, like just very caring, kind, warm. Not to say he wasn't, but just like very different approaches. But that was for ethics,
and probably closer to what you would expect. The faculty or people in this field would their approach or their style. And again, as we know, there's a lot of styles, but closer to what you'd think.
Yeah, that's a good observation for sure. But that first class, like getting introduced to theories, I still wish that we dove deeper into some of them, but like it was cool to immediately kind of be exposed to different ways that people conceptualize clients or patients, different ways, different interventions. And also as someone who likes history, it was cool to go through each theory's kind of history.
Right.
And then see where they're all kind of converging in some way, where like they start to borrow from each other. They start to see like, actually that method is really useful from like a person-centered approach. So like maybe we just start using unconditional positive regard.
Yeah.
Regardless of how I'm conceptualizing this person.
It is amazing how like as we learn about the theories and everything, people kind of have their preferences or their specific sort of modalities or interests. And you and I were actually just having a long conversation about this specific thing last night, but so many of these things are just built from the things that people think are in opposition, but they're actually much closer.
Yeah.
It's fundamentally, there's a lot of similarities in the different, that's my thought at least, in the different techniques.
I mean, we don't need to go down the whole rabbit hole of the idea of tribalism, but I think people like to feel connected to communities.
Yeah.
And so like people often put themselves in boxes for better or for worse. There's a lot of positives, a lot of negatives that can come from that, and a lot of growth as well. Like to be able, if you're open-minded, to like have discussions about like why you're connected with this theory versus that one. And if you're speaking with someone who aligns more with that other theory, having a conversation about like why it works for each person.
Right.
But yeah, I think there's a component of that where it's like, well, I feel connected to whatever this theory is for whatever reason from my own personal experience.
Yeah.
Is my kind of assumption.
And I think
people
that's a lot of times how people kind of pick their first sort of modality or whatever they're going to kind of dive into.
It feels natural. And I still go back and forth in my head of like, is that taking the easy route because it felt natural? And like, should I be challenging myself to explore these other theories? Or is that my body telling me something that like, maybe it's easy for a reason. And like, that's not inherently a bad thing.
So in the last several years, you've already had like been in several settings within the field of mental health and counseling and psychology. Can you describe some of the experiences that you've had and continue to have up to the point of here starting at Courage and with this internship coming up here in about a week?
Yeah. So at the start of my master's program, I knew that we were going to be doing things like mock sessions, and to my school's credit, I really enjoyed the fact that the mock sessions, we were told to use as much real stuff that we've gone through as we're comfortable with our cohort.
Right.
Like, I think that helped us grow closer. I think it also helped for when we eventually were in the room with a real patient. That's all to say, I also wanted to make sure that I had some experience before getting through it. And so I feel lucky enough to have been connected with a private practice in Northbrook, Hoberman Wellness, and he was looking for a co-facilitator for a teen group for anxiety and depression, and interviewed. And so I helped co-facilitate that for about a year and a half, between a year and a half and 2 years, like throughout most of the program, and was there until my practicum and internship started. And so that was a great experience because to that point, I liked the idea of group, but like I had no idea what it really looked like in practice.
Sure.
And so I had some preconceived notions, and then to see his approach was again just it wasn't very out there as like, but it seemed fun. It seemed like he was like in his element and like made it his own while still putting all of his clients first. And
was there a component, like I don't know if this kind of came up as you were working with this Mitch Mitch Hoberman, as you were working with him. In this idea of like things feeling intuitive, and as did it feel like you saw this style, or you saw the way that he would sort of facilitate these things, and even if it was maybe different than what in some ways you may have expected, just because again there's all these different styles, did seeing like a unique approach or a different approach, did it feel intuitive and therefore like, oh, I didn't know that we could do it this way, but does that make sense?
Yeah, you kind of hit the nail on the head for me at least. And I know because Mitch and I had multiple conversations about it, of like, it took him a lot of time to feel confident enough to be as authentic as he is in those settings, and to really feel that he could put his spin on the interventions and use his creativity, which is all to say, like, I'm excited by the opportunity maybe in the future to do something similar, but like, still understanding that it's not just, this is where you start. Like, there's a lot of like groundwork and building a strong base to be able to get to that point.
We talk about rapport all the time, and that's all, it's like all the interventions, the techniques, the strategies, all of that stuff, at least in my experience. Other people might experience it differently, but that just doesn't seem likely to be particularly effective without that rapport that becomes built. But then once you have that, then you can really, I'm going to say this in quotes, but like do whatever, of course, whatever that, utilizing the interventions and things, but in a style that can be much more approachable, I think, than people might expect.
And it opens up to that flexibility of like designing interventions that are client specific.
Right.
It's that collaborative piece of like, maybe I wouldn't have done this with like Johnny, but with Ryan, it's a good fit, or I can adapt it for this patient in this way because I know them and they know me.
Right. And so that was something that you had kind of done, like you said, alongside while you're in your program and everything like that. And we used to talk about this a lot, where I'd hear your experiences in the group settings, and I was like, you're getting experiences that I had not even had. And I was like, you're getting really incredible. Like again, specifically with like being in groups, and you were like, you were navigating it and trying to figure it out. And I was like, I don't even know. I don't even have much. I just like listening to these things. So it's something that it seems like, again, there was a connection of even the group thing, the group dynamic, which I don't even know if you had necessarily thought of.
Yeah.
That would be something that you would do at any point.
For sure. I remember calling you often and being just like very charged after a session, even if it felt like for most of it I just sat there, which like in practice maybe I didn't do that, maybe I did, but I just remember always giving the qualifier. I'm like, I feel weird saying it, but like it's so fun.
Yeah.
And it's like when you think like teens with anxiety and depression could get like really heavy, and like some sessions did get really heavy, but ultimately like all of the relationships built in there and the trust and vulnerability, like it was just incredible to kind of see it play out. And like over that period of time, it was also interesting to see like different clients kind of phase out, phase back in, new clients come, and how all of the group dynamics change.
Right.
Like even one person not being there for a week can change the entire environment and how people communicate and who decides to communicate.
Shout out to Mitch Hoberman.
Yeah.
Is it Mitch or Mitchell?
I think his full name is Mitchell, but I called him Mitch.
Okay, so we'll say, yes, shout out Mitch.
Yeah, thank you again, Mitch.
So along with, or sort of after your time with Mitch, and it's the practice is called Hoberman
Wellness.
Hoberman Wellness. So after that, what else has kind of been going on up to this point?
So I was there until my practicum and internship started. I applied a few places, like Alexian Brothers. I ultimately interviewed at Turning Point, which is a community mental health center in Skokie. And they have a great groups program there too. I'm going to end up talking about groups a lot more than I expected to, but both like community support and process and music group to like community outreach groups to living with psychosis, political action. Like there's a wide variety of just like getting clients involved.
Right.
And so I started there. I see individual clients there too, for what it's worth.
Well, and that was like that, and that was where you were starting to get like even different experiences than having come from that initial experience with groups, right?
Well, exactly.
So yeah.
Thank you for pointing that, because that's probably where my head just was. Is that like even starting groups there, like each one, depending on who I was co-facilitating with, felt completely different. Like it really is just kind of, I don't want to say it's too much pressure on the facilitators, but like they do set the environment up to be like, to kind of be make or break. Like, so it's been cool to see different groups, because I've also subbed for groups that like I'm not in every week, and just seeing the different dynamics where like some of the clients overlap, but they act completely different depending on the groups.
Right. And you observe that stuff, and that's a part of the kind of going back to like the fun part of it, really, or the part that I think you and I share a love for, is like the fact that you notice that stuff, and it's activating as well. So
yeah, it's all data, and it's ultimately what we choose to do with that data. And I feel like a lot of the time it just kind of sits in storage, but like if something will come up, it'll draw it forward, and it just helps navigate that situation.
So I want to go, we're going to get in the time machine here for a second. We're going to go, I guess, 10 years ago or something, whenever we first met.
Well, I think so there's two things that I think of, and we should probably just check.
Yeah.
I know offhand.
No, I'd like,
it's
this is,
Music Box Theater on Christmas, or the Michael Shannon spray painting.
Yeah. So Brian's referring to, we're trying to figure out, like, even just right now, when the first time we literally met was.
It's probably before that even, but like the first hangout is.
Yeah. And you were and are close friends with a mutual friend of ours. And and who I've known for a very long time, but you had known it through another way.
Yeah,
but
we were both camp counselors.
yeah, you were both camp counselors. And then I was introduced to you, and it was either at, yes, as Brian's saying, me and some friends created the actor Michael Shannon. We created these stencils because we just sort of became fascinated with Michael Shannon one summer. We still love Michael Shannon, but at the time also. And we created these.
Love Michael Shannon. You still do, but you used to too.
Yes, the Mitch. Speak a lot of Mitches coming up. Say Mitch Hedberg, but we were doing this artwork. We created these sort of graffiti, these Michael Shannon stencil graffiti pieces, and you had come over at some point with our friend Ryan, how I met you initially. But at that time, I didn't really know you. We just you were just a friend of a friend. And then at some point, it must have been around the same time. It would have been. We went to the Music Box Theater to see the Hateful Eight, the Quentin Tarantino movie Hateful Eight, on Christmas Day. And I think that was the first time that we had spent like a larger amount of time together. And my recollection of that was always, this is going to come up throughout this episode here, but like, it felt like you talk about like you meet someone and it just clicks. It's like, oh, this is just a person I want to be around.
Yeah.
That was, we didn't even know each other that well at that point, if really at all. And we just were like, hit it off.
It had been like we'd known each other for years already.
Completely.
That was my memory of that movie as well. The Michael Shannon, I just remember being anxious and thinking like, these guys are really cool. I didn't know that you could just make these like stencil art projects.
Little did you know that we weren't. We were just
no. I know now though.
Yeah. But so then from that point, I guess something that I find particularly unique about our relationship is the fact that really from the first time that we ever spent any time together, there was a level of not just comfort, not just, hey, this is somebody cool that I want to hang out with. I want to talk about like vulnerability for a second. And we were sharing things with each other from a very early point of our relationship that I feel like were things that you would have to have known someone for a lifetime to feel that comfort level of sharing. And this was just things that were going on in our life, right? Just challenges or things we were excited about or pain or hurt or whatever. And we would talk about those things with each other. But as I'm even talking about it right now and reflecting on it, it's just, and I think this, again, it speaks to you of you always made me feel incredibly comfortable going to you whenever anything was going on. And it didn't matter what it was.
Thank you for saying that. Yeah, I have a very vivid memory of sitting in your parents' kitchen cross-legged on the counter with all the lights off for whatever reason, just talking about like anything and everything, but like mostly just very vulnerable things things that had happened to us, relationship issues that were ongoing, and
this was like extremely early on in us. Yeah.
To us knowing each other.
Yeah. And I think, and you modeled that first because you sort of came out and just shared, what had been going on in your life, reflecting back throughout your life and telling me things. And that made me feel then comfortable to share with you and talk and be there for each other at a point when I wasn't thinking about it like that. I wasn't like thinking, we could reflect on it. We'll talk. Maybe we could.
Well, if I'm here for him, he can be there for me. Like,
right. No, it wasn't that. I put language to it now, but that is, I think, what was happening. And the reason when I was thinking about having this conversation with you, this very like formal interview conversation with you, because we talk, for the listeners, I mean, Brian and I talk for hours and hours every week, just separately. It's not all podcast interview and conversations.
I record most of them now.
Oh, dang it. Okay. But I was thinking about it from the standpoint of relationships, and I think even specifically like male relationships, quite frankly. And to take it a step further, the vulnerability and just kind of sharing what's going on, because there were a lot of points in my life, like I had a lot of, I had some close friends and family and all of that, but there weren't really places there wasn't necessarily a person that I always felt like I could share anything with. And you were that person who I could share anything with. And I think there was I'll just speak for myself. There was a critical importance for that, to the point where I don't know how I would have processed things without that. By the time I personally went to therapy, this happened after we had first met. So, I mean, I'm not saying that Brian was my therapist before I had a therapist, but I think a lot of the things that we talk about are just being there for one another. So anyway, I know I just kind of ramble a little bit, but that's like my reflection of our, not just where our relationship is now, but I think even really notably where our relationship started from.
Yeah. I mean, you touched on something of like that willingness to be vulnerable. It brought up like memories of being very young and me being somewhat in tune with that. I don't know that it was like intentional, but it was this idea that like, I think most kids, whatever is kind of happening to them, they just associate as normal. And like, of course, this happens to everyone because it's happening to me, and it's hard to think outside yourself when you're that young. But I remember just like saying things that were happening to friends and then getting feedback of like, are you okay? And it's like, yeah, there's just things that are like, and so to me, I've always viewed like friends as family to some extent, as well as this idea that like that bond is like, you can't sever it once you form it. And so, of course, I'm going to put all my trust in them. Of course, I'm going to just say what's happening to me. And if they choose to do it back, like, awesome. Like, I can be there for them. That part felt easy.
Well, that's the thing. So that, like, I feel like that's one of the components of it felt easy. Whereas it didn't, I was going to say like when you would, because that can, when you zoom out, you could think that could be a lot to take on when there is that emotional vulnerability of kind of, but for you, it didn't feel like a burden.
Yeah. And then as I got older, kind of into my teenage years, that framework changes. It turns more into like identifiable empathy of where it's like I'm going through things. Therefore, everyone is probably going through things that they're not loving. Like if I'm struggling, other people are struggling. Like, I guess that's still putting yourself into it, but it kind of formed out like, I have a lot of memories with like certain friends, like I'll name drop one of them, PJ, where things would be going wrong at home or with his girlfriend, and he would call me, and it was like a super cool feeling of like, I'm glad that he feels that trust. And yeah, it always just made sense. Like, why, back to that idea of intuitive, like why would I just push it down? Like, I don't know. It has to go somewhere. And so like,
and I think too, it's like, I there's something else that you did and you do and you did that is something that's incredibly, I'll just speak for myself, unique, and was something that like I value, and we joke about this a lot, but it's true. You're someone who, because how well you know me, and I would say I think we knew each other extremely well very early on, and that's only just like grown more and more. Brian, I'm talking about you like you're not here, but you were someone you would, and I do the same for you, but we call each other out.
Yeah.
Now, here's the thing. When you love somebody, like, these are things, and I'm going to use the should word, right? Like, you should be able to do that, but that doesn't mean that people do it.
It's also hard.
It's hard. That's the whole thing. It's hard. Like, and when I say should, I mean like, yeah, sure, that's a nice concept. Like, oh, I know this person loves me.
We hold each other accountable. It's like, do you?
Yeah. And this is something that Brian and I feel like we've really, one of the things I value the most about our relationship is like, we call each other out. We've called each other out. And when that happens, and because Brian is better, or traditionally, and has been better at taking that than I have been. One of the things I've tried to grow and continue to work on is like sometimes being defensive. But Brian is someone that like, it's not, when I say that we'll call each other out, it's not like that. I would always be like, oh, thank you so much for saying that. I mean, that's led to like nothing like major, but there's been spats. There's been times when like, and we, and that's the thing is like, we'll, even in those moments, usually call out the thing that's like, yeah, there's a tension, right? But we talk about it.
And afterward, within a day or even a minute or hour, we're making jokes about it. But I think that comes back. I also just want to acknowledge like the luck factor of like
100%.
Like the fact that we were able to build a relationship and the trust, because it takes a lot of trust to make those, like, to give that feedback, knowing that like this might put like a chip in the relationship briefly, but like that's not actually going to impact it to the point of its destruction.
And to know that there's like there's a resilience to, it's not even just a resilience. It's like, it will not change. Like there's nothing, it's like,
But it's also, I mean, it comes from a loving place, as you've kind of pointed out, where
Right.
like I think, to speak broadly, I would assume to some extent everyone's had that feeling of like, I could just tell a white lie or a lie by omission or a half truth,
Mhm.
and it'd be so much easier
Yeah.
than just saying the thing. But it's like, oftentimes, and I think a lot of people know deep down, like just saying the thing and then whatever like react to what happens, and like that's gonna be uncomfortable.
Because that compounds. Like, it might be easier right in that moment to just do at the time, what feels like the easier thing, the convenient thing. But I think what I've learned, what I think what we both learned, and is that like those things compound. And if you just say the thing, going back to just like being able to say anything to each other, it's just it doesn't mean it's going to be like easy, but it's like that's the way through.
Yeah. Well, then you don't have to talk about all the things that happened in those times
Right.
after of like, so why didn't you just tell me straight up? It's like, because I was afraid.
Right.
Like, if we're being honest, because I wasn't in a spot to carry that discomfort.
Mm-hmm.
And so I kicked it down the road.
And this kind of
got bad enough to.
And again, it's like these aren't things that I was like consciously thinking about throughout the time of our relationship. But like, I also think that it goes to this idea where we think about in like therapeutic settings, right? Or in therapy rooms and things like that, where it's kind of getting to a point where feeling our feelings, right? The big idea of feeling our feelings. Like, what does that really mean? Where it's like, okay, so I don't want to feel these feelings. Well, right. Yeah. Certain feelings, right? I'd imagine that. We'd all imagine that. But in the sense of how it related to, I felt like it showed up in our relationship is we may say something to each other, and I'm not saying it thinking that or you're not saying it knowing that it's going to like land immediately, or that it's even going to be like, oh, like again, going back to what I said before, thank you for saying that. Thank you for sharing. It could lead, like you're expressing, like you said, you're being honest from the jump. You're doing the harder thing, having to not know what that's going, like there's no guarantee of results doing
Shows
that.
a lot of trust and vulnerability in the relationship.
Right. So now as I'm talking about it, and like I said at the beginning of the conversation, we're going to kind of weave in and out. Clinically, it's kind of what we ask. It's kind of like what we're asking clients and patients and people in the room to do, in the sense of that when we talk about building like together, right? We're doing this for them together, building that trust, building that rapport, building the therapeutic alliance, because that's kind of like it's like I was about to say it's the only way. It's not the only way, but I'm just saying like it's like, yeah, I'm going to say this thing, I'm going to express this feeling, and I don't know what's going to happen when I do that, but knowing that over time, if we practice that we can build you could probably have better language to this, but like that it's okay to express the thing that we don't want to, or it's okay to feel the thing that we feel uncomfortable feeling.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
I don't have the most years of experience, but the experience that I have had with individual clients, it's unlike any relationship I've had in my life, which makes sense because it's kind of this nebulous, there's a professional service being provided.
Right.
But then we're trained to be authentic ourselves,
right.
Build like a real relationship with them, a real trusting, like I'm going to be me, you're going to be you, and we're going to help navigate whatever's going on. And that's where, like, as that rapport builds and that trust builds, it starts to almost weave away from the professional. Like, it has to be on a wavelength between them.
Yeah.
But there is still that like very personal component of like empathetically challenging a client, where probably not the best idea during intake.
Right. Probably not. Yeah.
But 6 months, a year in, after they know you, you know them, probably more appropriate to be like, I'm noticing a pattern. I hear you saying this. There's a disparity with this. I'm just noticing that. What do you think? And
that can lead to, like, if we're putting like the therapy language to it too, that can lead to ruptures, but it's like a rupture is not inherently the end of a therapeutic relationship. Yeah. That's a part of it, just like any. So again, it's a very unique type of relationship, but it has parallels to, in a friendship, right? Where we can have ruptures, but it's like, there's no concern about that, like being the end of anything. It's like then we work through that.
Yeah. In that same vein of, I mean, it could rupture to the end. Like
It could. It could.
That's always the fear.
Right.
That's where some of that I think is rooted.
Right, because that's a good point. Because if there was a guarantee that it wouldn't end a relationship of any kind,
Yeah.
then we would probably more frequently feel comfortable.
Yeah.
But so that's a good distinction.
But equally, like, that's where the rapport and trust comes in of if I've done my job in at least analyzing what I think a relationship is, and I say something over a line, I misunderstand something, I'm putting trust in the relationship that person will tell me
Right.
that I stepped over the line,
Mm-hmm.
that this is how they felt from that. And so as much as it's scary because it's like, what's going to happen? It's like, put trust in the other person that like, they'll tell you what's happening. And then it's a lot easier to navigate a response knowing that like, it's the onus isn't all
Right. And
on me for saying it.
I've said this before, but one of my favorite things that happens in a session is when a client will say, when I'll say something and a client will say, no, that's not quite right, or you misunderstood that. I love that. And I'll usually tell clients, like, I'll really encourage that response, because I'd always rather someone says that than doesn't. That's much more challenging if it's not said, and then we just continue on without it being acknowledged. Because then if someone, like you said, it goes back to the idea that I said something, I maybe misunderstood something, and if somebody is able to share, because there's a vulnerability in that too, of being like, that's not right, or that you're wrong about that.
There's trust,
It's trust. It's trust.
And I would agree, vulnerability of like, it also shows engagement in the relationship of like, they're listening to what you're saying, and then they still are like, well, no, which means that they heard what you said and that's not how they're interpreting it. But like, if they just were like, okay, it's like, that doesn't mean that they're not engaged or involved, but like taking that step of clarifying.
It's usually a big, like, it's usually an encouraging step, right, when that happens. So again, it's like, it is, I mean, we, again, for as Brian, you and I have talked about these things as far as even like the way that it pertains to our relationship before, but it's interesting, like even right now, talking about it in these ways and tying it into kind of the work that we do now and those sorts of things, because it, as often we say as therapists, like it makes sense, right? A lot of these things sort of check out. And I was thinking about something else where I'm going to share something with you that I shared with you at, I guess it would have, I don't know if it was like at your wedding. I guess it may have been in the wedding speech that it was really one of the best wedding speeches I think that's ever been given.
I don't know if people swear on this, but I literally swore while he was doing it and started crying. So he actually might have given one of the better winning speeches ever given.
But I want to pull a quick anecdote from that, and it was basically where at the time that we met at a really critical point in my life, which, I was going through my first like breakup, first time experiencing like heartbreak, all of the things you'd imagine that would go along with the cliches were like, oh wait, there's cliches for a reason, because I'm feeling all of them. I was going through a tough time, and also just like early 20s, all the other things that come up with that. And you, me, and Ryan, our great friend, we all moved in together. And that's the other thing, is I've known Ryan for like my whole life. At the time that we all moved in together, we knew each other, but still it was relatively early on, maybe a year or two. Right. And so
we were talking about going to Austin too.
Right. There were a lot of different living options that I haven't thought about that in a long time. Why are we just
staying in the state? Let's travel, man.
We could have been, there was a lot of options. We ended up in Lincoln Square neighborhood. But when we were living together, I was just like, initially, right, I was going through a really hard time emotionally, and you were somebody who, again, like we've talked about, you were incredibly, we had already had this bond and this closeness, but I was goofy. I a lot of my processing of everything I was feeling at that time was manifesting and just kind of being goofy, because that was like an outlet. Now, the ways that I was acting, if I was not as close with somebody, they would be like, I don't want to be around this person.
I didn't have a choice.
Yeah, but Brian didn't have a choice. No, but so I go back to this idea that I used to go after this was a past career, after work every single day. Brian, you'd be in your room, on the computer doing, playing a game, doing whatever. And I would every single day go into your room and go on your bed and just like annoy the crap out of you, or at least what I was doing. Well, you know what? I think I was annoying. Like, it was
There were
annoying.
times, but like I also think you were trying.
Well,
It wasn't like you were just existing
no.
politely.
Oh yeah, no. That's a good distinction. I was yes, I was trying to be annoying, but again, that was just like where I was at. It was there. It was cathartic for me. It was therapeutic, whatever you want to call it.
We
To
could
just
call it limit testing the relationship.
it was that too. It probably was like there was something there too, probably as a component of that. But you know what it was too is that and I have never put words to this part of it. So we actually you have to have another wedding so I can redo the speech and put the words to it.
Okay.
But it can still be with your wife, Emily. But I'm just saying you have to do another wedding so I can give another speech.
Okay.
Whatever that will take.
She'll be thrilled to hear that it can still be her.
But I felt safe. I felt truly safe. I felt like I could be myself. And I never knew, I actually didn't know what, after going, after there were times in my life where I think I had felt like I could be myself, but there was a period of time when I had no idea who I was. I had gone through, I'd gone through this loop, and it was like the catharsis of coming out of that period of time and being able to test being whoever I thought or I felt like I was, or that I just being me, and you accepting that, and I felt safe. And I think I know an incredibly vital part of who I am today, coming out of that point in time. But that's what I think what it was. It's just like when I'm saying I was annoying you, yes, I was often intentionally annoying you, but I was being goofy. I was doing whatever. And we'd need like a series of podcasts to describe like specifically. The listeners are probably like, well, what were you doing? I mean, a number of things. I used to take Snapchat videos of you
Great.
some were actually kind of funny. I would just bother Brian while he was doing.
To be fair, I would dish it back.
Oh yeah, no, completely.
I was not purely a victim of circumstance. Like
but it was that I could be goofy, I could be myself, and I think I was rediscovering, and I think even just discovering in a lot of ways, like who that person was. And then, so it's nice. I guess what I'm saying is that it's nice to have had a person and have a person where I can feel that like completely myself around. Both of our wives joke that when Brian and I are together or we're talking, like we can be completely serious with our wives, and I mean, or like we can be like one way when we're talking with them or something, and then we'll sort of spend time together and be completely wild and goofy.
Yeah.
And they're like, is he like this in other contexts?
I've asked Katie, I'm like, is he like this when I'm not around? And she's like, no. And so I've had to apologize. I'm like, I'll take full.
We bring that out of each other, but it's a very special part. It's like it's like an incredibly, it's a part that it's a part of who I am. And it's like again, a critical part of having a space for that too.
I mean, I'm awful at accepting compliments, but like, I appreciate that you put words to it. Cause again, it makes it sound like I was doing some profound thing. I was just on my computer, like hanging out with a friend. Like that's genuinely how it felt.
But you know what? Because I think that there's value to putting language to some of these things for like people listening, and this was kind of one of the things we were talking about leading up to this conversation. I think from my perspective, what you were doing as we reflect on it is you very much didn't like reject me, you didn't like kick me out, but you also didn't say like you would dish it back. Like if I was being annoying, like you would tell me that, but it was out of like you'd be like we would just be taught. It would just, again, it was like I could be myself, but that doesn't mean I'm gonna not like you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. I mean, potentially this might be the wrong clinical language, because again, that wasn't a clinical experience. I mean, maybe it was, but like
it was cathartic.
Just normalizing like this is just who he is.
Yeah.
So like if something crossed a boundary, I'd snap or throw something,
and then like you said from earlier,
or be goofy back, or like try to, I don't know, body slam from the top rope. Any number of like
literally,
on a swivel chair. It's really not a good idea.
So So again, I think that this is one thing, this is a podcast that we're always very intentional around, like the clinical component of it. It's not an advice giving podcast or anything like that, certainly on the clinical side. But I do want to just say that from the friend side of it, just from connections and those relationships, one thing that I do feel like I want to share is just the fact that for people listening of any age, I don't think this is specific to any age, this could be any age. Like you said, it's really important to acknowledge we're lucky. We're really lucky and fortunate that we met each other. But also, it did take it is scary to, you have to find the right people, meet the right people. But ultimately, like, I like the way you put it earlier of you kind of just, you lead if you can. And it's hard. It's really hard. But if you lead with vulnerability, you're not always, not everyone's going to vibe with it. Right. And that's okay. That's why it's hard to think about leading with vulnerability, but you're going to find those people. Like, there are those people out there that, do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. I mean, just to get sentimental for a second, like, I also struggled with a ton of identity issues throughout high school, college, early 20s. Again, I don't know that that's unique to any one person, but what they experience specific to them is.
Mm-hmm.
And being able to find people, it can feel helpless at times. Like, if I am myself, no one's going to accept me fully. I'm going to have to put up some amount of facade. What even is the concept of myself?
Right.
Because the way you perceive yourself is going to be different than how any other individual perceives you. Like, even if every time I hung out with you, I hung out with Ryan and no other people, like, you both would still perceive me differently.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's to some degree outside of my control. But this idea that, like, it can work out.
Yeah.
And it is a process, and there's going to be lows and there's going to be highs, both in the relationships, in the journey of, like, self-discovery, finding out what's important to you. It's not as simple as, like, when you're a teenager, you try on different hats and then you find the hat that you're going to wear the rest of your life. There is still that progress of trying on different hats in every different aspect of life as those new aspects come up. New relationships exist. Like,
I'm still trying on different hats, like you, and I think you are too, right? I mean, it's just, and it's still like, that's the older thing is, it's like, this isn't so much, it's not like a self-actualization. It's more of just at any given point, I guess I'm just saying, like, it's okay to try those on. It's okay to try different hats on. It's okay to, and I think finding your community, finding your people, at least in my experience, has been.
It could just be the decoration, but I'm picturing our hat when we're together being one of the Dr. Seuss Cat in the Hat.
Totally. Yes. Exactly.
Since I don't know if this fits here, but since you've been so kind with your words, I guess I'll give you one back of, I've never really put language to this, but whenever we first met, I found the same joy in ridiculousness, and just whatever it was we were talking about, it had this, like, childlike charm and excitement to it. And, like, whether that was movies, sports, like card games,
music,
cars, like relationships, people, how we see people, what we found funny, like comedies, just everything had, I feel like when I was young, things kind of had that sparkle to them. And then it felt like for a long time that sparkle went away. And having relationships with people like you brought that back. And so thank you.
Well, again, it means a lot. And, like, just exactly that, I feel the same thing. The feelings are mutual there. So as far as, again, you're starting here at Courage to Connect in about a week to 2 weeks. I always like to kind of get an idea for, again, you being somebody who's already worked in, like, several different kinds of settings and with several, different kinds of client populations. How would you word kind of the sort of the populations or the areas of interest as far as the work, this being, on the counseling side, like, who are you, what are you interested in? Who are you interested in working with?
That's a good question. The first group that comes to mind is just coming back to that kind of teenage dream of mine of being the person for those in high school that need someone. As far as future like interests, as far as like, I know you have a great interest in like gambling and all the different ways that manifests. I'm interested in a lot of the research behind gambling, and I don't know if it's been talked about on the podcast, but we've had personal conversations about like the younger generations being exposed to it younger and younger in the form of like loot boxes and games. Card packs were what we had when we were kids, but I don't know that there's even conversations around like that being considered gambling. And so a lot of just like that comes into like social media and just all the different, there's a little bit of a condescending term, but like cheap dopamine available.
Quick.
In this day and age, and how that's going to impact like everyone, not just children, not adolescents, not adult, like everyone is being exposed to these things, and access to them is increasing quicker than the brain can change and develop relative to the species. So like
this goes back into one of the things that personally and professionally I love about you is your interest too in research. And that's how, going back to what you were saying before, where you sort of first approached the field formally through the counseling side, right? But the fact that I know that research is always going to be a part of what you do, at least correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like that's going to show up throughout your career.
I'm going to botch the saying, but I've tried for as long as I can remember to maintain this idea of like, if you're not learning, you're dying. And so this idea that there's always something new and cool. Like I love different hobbies, and maybe jump from them too quickly. That's something I can think about, but like there's always going to be something awesome in the field to explore. And so I think trying really hard to make space and time to explore those new avenues of like what's on the cutting edge, what's popular, what's the new research saying about some of these things is like important, both as a professional, but also just as a person. And like the fact, I feel very lucky that I find that interesting, because it makes it, just to go back to an ongoing theme, it makes it easy.
That also is something that I've really loved about doing this podcast is and since I've been working in the field of mental health, is just all of the different avenues. Like I've learned, like every single day I learn a new thing that I didn't know was a part of this field, because I think traditionally it's thought about in like 3 different ways, but it's like thousands of different ways and access points. And I think that's where the research side of it particularly is so fascinating, because it can be almost anything. So Brian, thank you so much again for coming on Courage Speaks. I'm so excited to be able to like, this is just like a really cool function of you being here, is that I can call you like a colleague now here at Courage to Connect. I'm excited for everyone here to, you're starting in a couple of weeks officially, but I'm so excited for everybody here to get to know you. I know several people already have, and to experience your warmth, experience the person that you are. And one last thing I'll say before I ask you the final question on Courage Speaks is that we probably I think you first probably started it a couple of years ago, but we say love you to each other at the end of phone calls. And it's become something, we didn't always do it, but we started doing it. And it wasn't like it wasn't like we didn't name it. It just, you probably said it once and then we just do it now. Yeah, exactly. But I bring that up just to say that I'm going to give some advice, not clinically. This is, right. This is just anecdotally. This is just in my experience. And I'm curious your thoughts on this. Really tell not just your family, and we consider each other family, like going back to, different words and all that, but like tell your friends that you love them. The ones that I think it's an important action. The ones that you love, tell them that. I think that's really, I don't know. I just have found that to be something that we never did, and then we did, and now it's just, it feels not only good, but it's also like a reminder every time. So I think you were the first person to start doing that. So the last question here that I have for you on Courage Speaks is a bit of a tradition here on the show, and that is, and you can answer this question in any variety of ways. Brian Ray, what is the last thing that surprised you?
Last thing that surprised. I don't know if the mic's picking this up, and it'd be kind of funny if it was, because I was trying to think of something punchy, like a one-word thing, and then cut, and I can't. And so now I am reeling. I'm going to be really thoughtful for a second.
Take your time.
Do you have any cheat codes or hints into like areas that people sometimes go to?
I will say that this has been answered in like there's been about 30 episodes of Courage Speaks.
Yeah.
This has been answered in about 30 different ways. So
I have to Google like how much times the ant's body weight it can carry, because we're getting to the point of needing to go to a Snapple fact or something where I was surprised that bees all congregate around their queen during a full moon. Like,
what is something that I think there's another...
No, I like the question.
No, I know, I understand, but I'm saying like one thing I usually would say in the question is, what's the last thing that surprised you, or like a recent thing? So is there something that you can recall? This could be from the last couple years, like something that you remember just being like, oh, I didn't know that, and that's not what I would have expected.
This is the worst answer possible, but I do have something that came to mind.
What is it?
That I don't like director Q&As at a movie premiere.
And I think that's great. And why do you not like? Because we've talked about this, but I like that answered in the lens of what surprised you.
Yeah, so we went to the Music Box for what I would describe as a okay horror movie, and the directors were there, and they did a little Q&A with the directors, and I think one of the producers, who it sounds like just gave money, and it was the most uninteresting Q&A. So like maybe it's just a bad representation, but like
you would think, oh, I get to see the directors, I get to see people a part of the movie talking about the movie, to see, and you were let that. It was not.
Well, it's like a don't meet your hero. Like, not that these guys were my heroes as far as like directors, but it's like a don't meet your heroes. It's like, oh, those are just some guys who are good at this media platform.
Like maybe I just like potentially it's like, I want to see the art that they've created, but they themselves in that instance were not good.
Yeah, and I don't know that they need to be.
No,
but that's why 99.9% of movie experiences are just seeing the art.
That's a great point. And they're not all accompanied.
Yeah, I think it would be fun, like if they were in the audience and they were just like randomly shouting out commentary, like that would at least be funny and kind of odd. But the idea where it's like, I don't know. I'm being a little judgmental, but like I don't know if they pre-screened the questions, but it was like audience members, and they were the most softball.
Yeah.
Like,
what was it like making the movie?
You seem so passionate about these topics. ChatGPT wants to know, when did you realize you like movies? Like,
yeah.
And they're like, oh, I've just always known.
So so not necessarily the last thing that surprised you, but a recent thing that surprised you is that you worded it as,
well, to put it more succinctly and to kind of bring things back on track, even though, again, I apologize for this answer. I really enjoy movies of all different genres, different styles, whatever. And so there's a snobbiness to me that I'm recognizing of like enjoying going to like a premiere. And it's like, oh, it's really cool. We went to the premiere and the directors were there. And it's like, oh, cool. How was it? Like that was
like the setup would be, this is something I should love.
Yeah.
And it
was like, we could go at the credits next time.
Yeah. I think I wanted to leave the movie very much.
The first 35% was amazing.
Well, Brian Ray, thank you so much again for joining.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm so sorry that it was going so well.
We did land the plane, though. It was a little bit of no, truly.
This is the one where everyone claps when it gets to the gate.
Love you, buddy.
Love you too.
Can't wait to get you on board here officially in a couple of weeks.
Cheers.
Thanks, as always, to John Marikowski for writing and producing our beautiful theme music. And thank you again to Brian Ray. We can't wait for you to get started here at Courage to Connect. Thank you, the listener, for tuning into Courage Speaks. We want to remind our listeners that the information and discussions presented in this podcast are intended solely for educational purposes. The content provided is not a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. It's important to consult with qualified mental health professionals or healthcare providers for personalized guidance regarding your individual situation. While we strive to provide accurate and up-to-date information, the field of mental health is complex and ever-evolving. The views and opinions expressed by the host, guests, or participants are their own and do not necessarily reflect those of Courage to Connect Mental Health Center. As always, for Courage Speaks, I'm your host, Sam Sherman. Be kind. Talk soon.